Up. He's wearing the absolute latest in California semi-formal. I give you Brent Kokaska.
Been an emotional roller coaster day. I violated the sacred trust. Going back to Order Rover, the pilot myth. I started my seminar how to land the airplane for non-pilots this morning. One thing led to another. And I suddenly got carried away and let it out of the bag. It's easy to land the airplane. And I proceeded then to describe how we'll control the airspeed, it'll fly around, then we'll let it come down, and it'll fall on the runway and coast to us down. Even in the back of the room at that time, there were eyes, you know. Okay, sign up, and 15 of the participants in the class signed up to fly in the airplane, flying their airplanes. I still didn't know how this was going to go, but I was worried because, you know, where did this leak out? I explained to them a little bit. There's a pilot ego thing here, you know. It's supposed to look complicated. I mean, what would you talk about if it wasn't complicated? You couldn't think, you know, John Wayne might have done it. But after lunch, we started out in the airplanes. It almost reminds me a little bit of another Richard Bach story about Jonathan Livingston Seagull who went back to tell the other gulls they really could do it. They could be more than just birds, following the fishing boats around for food. And sometime out there this afternoon, we got 4 new gulls. There's Susan Gull, Helen Gull, Nellie Gull, and Pat Gull. So good. We added some power, went around. We did another landing after 15 minutes of air work or so. And she looks at me and says, "What's this macho pilot crap?" You don't understand. I didn't know to get the word out the door. I get back to my room, I write the notes under the door. I'll be out in the duck pond with the ducks tomorrow morning. But it went fantastically. They were very enthused, and we'll continue on tomorrow. There's going to be more calls in the morning tomorrow. So I'm very pleased with what's happened to today. I bet it was more fun than a shopping trip downtown. And it worked out very well. And we should stop slipping the notes under the door. Whoever's doing that. I'm sorry, it just slipped out. You know, I said anybody can do it, really. My original topic I'll get back to here is, I looked for different names for it. From Ruth, it has to be called The Tale of 3 Airplanes. There was 3 airplanes involved in the total thing. There was mine, another airplane, which it's there. It's going to be certified. It's finished its complete test. It belongs to John Coase. He flew it down here. It's out on the flight line. It's another IO-540 in a Cheetah. And there was a third airplane, which got returned back into a normal Cheetah. So there's 2 out there, mine and John Coase's. We've worked carefully. And as I go on with this, I'll mention different AYA members because without some of that support, I sure wouldn't be here now either. Amanda drove up from San Diego, but probably not that flowing. It all started back about 2.5 years ago when we entered this project. And I suppose everybody's heard about it. It was the idea, the concept, the original idea was very good. The execution was poor. Maynard Crosby started it up in Seattle, Everett, Washington. When he had that habit, he tended to spend the money on everything but the airplanes that he was supposed to be working on. He had various reasons for that. Mostly is, he owed money from other things, so he Kept shifting the funds around. And after nothing was happening for a couple of months, I thought I'd go up there and see what's happening in my airplane. I had heard that they did start, the engine was taken off, the old engine. Later turned out that was entirely true because it was sold. So I get there, and it's Saturday morning, nobody's around. I'm sitting outside his shop, sitting in the old gutter, wondering, what do we do now? I look next to me, there's another guy sitting in the gutter, Hey, what are you doing here? He says, I'm looking for Maynard. We probably have something in common. He says, well, I'm his mechanic. He says, I just paid for my house rent for last month with one of his checks and got a call from the bank late yesterday. It says I owe him last month's rent on the house. As well, we've got a common problem here. He said, you got the orange and white airplane. I said, yep. He said, yeah, last thing I did was ship your engine to the East Coast. So I looked and I found an engine in IO 540. It had an interesting history. It spent its life in Pakistan. On one side of an Aztec twin. I came back to the States because they didn't quite know how to overhaul it in Pakistan. And I bought it as a first-time run-out. I sent all the parts out to places where they aligned board the cases and reboard the cylinders. And all these parts coming in, there was a big pile of parts. You get about 1.5 times the pile of parts from an old 360 and a 540. So I said to this fellow, what do we do now? I can't even tow this thing out of here. I can't fly it out of here. I don't have an engine. He said, well, I just put the engine together. I said, well, I never did one of those. The beauty. He said, no. He said, what my grandfather does. I looked at him, he's about 45, about the same as me. You mean he did? He said, no, he does. So I said, well, let's give him a call, see what he's up to. He lives down in a little airport in Yelm, Washington, about 40 miles south of Seattle. It's out in the boondocks. There's a hangar. And talking to him on the phone, he sounds like he's about 30. I said, this is your son. He smells my grandfather, So he says, I'll be up 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll be ready to start. I said, okay. So he leaves his house at 5. He's up there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And he's 87 years old. And I hate those kind of guys. Those wear glasses, I like owning part numbers in the dim light, We start working. We're working in the back of a van. We had a little spread around the ground too, put the engine together. And, I look and it's noon. I said, do we stop for lunch? He said, not till we're done, So, we worked on it for 2 days straight. By George, most of the pieces went on, became an engine. Then we put the engine on the airplane, and we made do with a lot of parts. And I, of course, had to go back to San Diego in between a couple of these things. I come up on the weekend. One weekend, we got almost enough parts so that it looked like an airplane. So this leads to the first test flight, of course, or high-speed taxi. High-speed taxis always get away from you. There's no such thing as a high-speed taxi. No matter how seriously you intend a high-speed taxi, it always flies. So I fired up, taxi out, and it does. It flies. It flew all the way around the pattern, Power says, what the hell of a high-speed taxi? It got away from us, So we come back, and my wife had come up with me this time. We were staying in the Motel 8, Motel 6, something or other. And it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's fall, and it's Seattle, and the weather's horrible. Everybody's hands are blue because we did all this in about 40-degree air. And people had, just when things would get dim, people would stop by. At this time, I've got to thank Joe Brewer, Ken Blackman, both of whom stopped by and said, boy, you guys got a job, But we put it together. We didn't have all the parts. One of the things we didn't have was screws for the cowling back on. We riveted some extensions there. The airplane is 1.75 inches longer than the average Tiger. So Lowell says, oh, you hold that stuff on with Cleco fasteners. What's a plico fastener? He says, well, you got these pliers and it's this thing you stick in a hole and it's kind of like a rivet. You use it to line up rivets, only it replaces lost screws too. So here's this airplane. The plico fasteners all around the cowl. Look on. And Ken Blackman will confirm this. Those things are amazing. You can fly that airplane to San Diego with plico fasteners. And you stop for fuel and people say, they stand out about 30 inches all the way around. Looks like your cowl's holding up by plico fasteners. Of course, you have to get out of Washington, and of course, one of the things you do when you change an airplane, it no longer means its type certificate. So that brings you to your first exposure to the FAA. And the guys that operate under the sign is, hi there, we're here to help you. First thing they do is tear up your airworthiness certificate. And so you got to move with a ferry permit. Now, getting ferry permits is an art too. Best time to get a ferry permit is about 4:25 in the evening. If you get into FSDO and they're starting to put their coats on, and you come up with a plausible story on why you really need an airworthiness certificate, you find the number of questions they ask is pretty much limited by the second hand on the left. We're out of here in 3 minutes. I need a ferry permit to go to San Diego on this airplane, but it's a little out of, yeah, it's all over there, you know, and okay, sure, no sweat. Besides that, the weather's coming down. It's now at Boeing Field. This is up in Seattle. My wife is with me. My wife, I've been a flight instructor for 20 years. My wife hardly ever flew with me until we bought the airplane. And she flew with me a little bit on nice days. Never really liked IFR flying. So I left that choice to her. Are we going to get out of here? I had the FAA thing says, well, yeah, you know, you can ferry permit, it's good for a couple of days. She says, well, let's get out of here. So we take the airplane, flew it down to San Diego. So now that's great. Now we got an airplane that has no documentation, nothing. It's got an engine, and we know it flies because it got to San Diego from Seattle. But everything's an unknown on it. So I said, well, I'll just get hold of the FAA certification office in Long Beach. Now, most of us deal with FSDOs. FSDOs can write experimentals for home-built airplanes, but when you begin to deal with a production-built aircraft, you've got to deal with the aircraft certification branch. And there's not that many of them around the country. There's only 5 or 6 of them. One of them being in Seattle because of Boeing, and the other being in Long Beach because of Lockheed and MD-11s and DC-10s that we build there. So you call the FAA office in Long Beach, and you talk to the secretary, and she says, well, Mr. Henry Camper handles that. I said, okay, can I give my name? Have Mr. Camper call me. She says, certainly. A week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, he doesn't call. I call back, she said, well, I put a note on his desk. Nothing happens. So I said, well, I'll take a run up to Long Beach. Maybe I want to meet these guys anyhow, you know. So I get in the old FAA building, and they have a government office, not very fancy. And I said, where's everybody? There's nobody at any of these desks. She says, oh, of course not. They're McDonnell Douglas. So what are you doing there? She says, well, they go there every day because McDonnell Douglas gives them nice offices and secretarial service, and why would they want to come here? That way, Douglas has them right on here. So I said, which one's Mr. Camper's desk? And I look, and there's 8,000 phone messages, you know, like this on his desk. She says, yeah, if he ever comes in, I'm sure I'll answer all his phone messages. And I said, well, you know, tell me more about it. She says, I don't know much. I've only been here 3 years. I haven't seen him. But he handles my area for airworthiness. That's great. So I'm trying to figure out, how can I get him at McDonnell Douglas to find these guys? Because you can't find them at the FAA office because they never go to work. They just go to work at McDonnell Douglas. So I finally got some helpful people in the FSDO to meet him for lunch at McDonnell Douglas, the FAA man. Okay. So I go to McDonnell Douglas. Now, I find out McDonnell Douglas don't particularly get along well with these people either. I get in the middle of a conversation where they're trying for the MD-11 certification to use composite parts. And of course, the engineers from McDonnell Douglas all look like they're 20, 25 years old, just got out of college. They're designing all these exotic graphite materials. And the FAA guy is wondering where they put the rivets in order to meet this criteria. And the whole lunch conversation went, how would if we mold rivet heads in the composite material like in rivet? They know a rivet goes every 1 inch and it'll hold so much stress. They just don't quite know how to handle this composite material. So I kind of let that die down. And I explained my problem to him. He said, well, we take everything in order. Right now we're working on McDonnell Douglas. And I said, well, when did they sign up? It's 1946. Haven't worked through them yet, but I keep coming up with new projects. So I kind of explained everything what I wanted to do with the airplane and everything, and I guess he's a little misunderstood. This is what I wanted to do, you know. So he says, okay, he says, I can take care of you from the airway side and get you an experimental, but you've got to meet these other people that's called propulsion engineering, structural engineering, and aerodynamics engineering over here in the other part of the building, because those are the ones you have to convince that what you've done complies with the appropriate regulations in Part 23. I said, sure, I'm game for anything here, because besides that, I'm not quite sure I'm going to do this thing. So he says, okay, we'll send you an experimental. In fact, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to give you an experimental for research and development. That'll let you do anything you want with the airplane. I said, boy, this guy's okay, you know, once you get to know him. So I get back down to San Diego, and I stop in a local Pisco talking to airworthiness inspectors there, and he said, they're going to give you an experimental? I said, yeah. And what kind? No, R&D. And they go, I said, oh, you're not doing me a favor. So you want an experimental to show compliance with the regulations. You don't want an experimental for R&D. I said, why? He said, wait, give it a day. So here comes the thing in the mail. Open it up. Take experimental certificate from the airplane. It says your operating area is defined in longitude and latitude. That's odd, you know? Besides that, I don't recognize these numbers. To regress a little bit here, I do a lot of instrument instructing, and one of the approaches down here in San Diego is Carlsbad Airport, Palomar Airport in Carlsbad, California. You make the ILS there, and the runway's right near the ocean. So to miss the approach, they take you out over the ocean and climb you before they evacuate you back. And every time we cross that beach in VFR conditions, I look down at that water and I hear that at night, it goes, you know. I said, look at the porpoise. Yeah, the Great White porpoise. And when you look back in the hazy days and you can't see the shore anymore, you come on, turn us back in, you know. So I get out my sectional chart, let's see what I got. And I'm looking, and there's off the coast of San Diego, there's a warning area. The military uses called W291. I got W291 as an operating area. Starts 50 miles offshore, goes for 200 nautical miles on the do your flight testing there. I found out R&D, you can go in and with a piece of 2x4, a piece of plywood, and a Chevy V8 and say, I'd like an R&D. Experimental certificate, sure. You know. And we say W291 for you too. So, this is what I was limited to. Well, we'll make the best of it, right? We'll give it a shot. At least we'll show intent. So my wife has always been the data taker on all these spikes for cylinder head, temperature, oil temperature, and all various things, and step climb cooling and everything. So she gets her data pad out there, and we take off, and the shore disappears. Same thing when the island disappears. And Navy control out there it goes by the name of Beaver. They just handle all the F-14s out of Miramar. They go out and shoot the missiles down on the Point Magoo and stuff like that. So I said, well, I'll call Beaver. So I call Beaver, and Beaver says, do you have the Coronadus? I said, what? The water has the natus. They give you a frequency, you tune into it. Good morning, Beaver information Bravo. Wave heights 2 to 4 feet, the water temperature 72 degrees, swells directly southwest. The warning area has a natus. Okay, I go back to them. I got your Bravo information Beaver. Okay, it's not a restricted area, it's a warning area. Have fun, let us know what you're doing and when you're leaving. Meanwhile, of course, everybody's familiar with this. The military uses UHF. 2 F-14s show up out of Miramar. So you only hear one side of the conversation. You hear Beaver because they transmit both on VHF and UHF. And the conversation goes, meanwhile, I'm looking at all this water down there, and you can't see shore anymore, you know. It's hard to concentrate. So Good morning, gentlemen. Gunslinger 402 and 406. Who's shooter this morning? Roger, understand 406 is shooter this morning. Okay, we'll be coming up out of Magoo in about 3-4 minutes. Go ahead and they go into an attack spread with one of them as the shooter. It was going to be a infrared missile takedown of a cruise missile simulation out of Point Magoo. Look. And of course, you're only hearing one side of the conversation. And then he says, 4531 November, say color aircraft. I said, orange. Hey, 406. The other aircraft in the target area is also orange. It's time to go home. That's a nice day. So much for that one. Now, meanwhile, things are getting kind of bleak, right? The airplane's working fine. But we got to get into all these Part 23 requirements. Sitting there wondering, how am I going to prove some of this stuff to them? I'm writing all these test plans, and they find a little fault, and I'd rewrite them, and they'd accept them. And you have to prove that now that you climb at a much higher angle, what's the unusable fuel in the airplane? Did you change it from what the Grumman published? What Grumman used to establish it? Was it level flight and a descent, steep descent? Was it in a steep climb? If it was a steep climb, you changed it because your climb is steeper and the fuel is not going to feed in the tanks, or feed down the sumps. So you go out and take the windshield at what VY looks like, and then tip the airplane up to VY on the ground on blocks of wood, and pump the tanks dry and see what's left for unusable fuel. And I agree to that, finally. Come out and witness it and say, I saw that, 4/10. Now, where did Grumman do that come up with 8/10 on the Tiger? I have no idea, but it wasn't because it was sitting like this. So I buy that. Biggest problem you have with them, if you go to a meeting with them and there's 6 of them in a room, you're better off 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 3-on-1 even. 6-on-1 is terrible, They just kind of kick regulations back and forth between themselves, see if they can think of a new one while you're sitting there. So, first meeting I went up there with them, I remember the manager of propulsion engineering has all his boys in there, and they're talking about what all you have to look for a project like mine, whether or not it was feasible. And Gene Cartier, the manager, finally decided it probably wasn't a feasible project. He asked me, how far along are you? I flew upwards in your parking lot. Oh, okay. It'll probably fly then. So I'm sitting there, I'll never get by these guys. They get the hot fuel test. You have to heat fuel up to 115 degrees in the wing and take off flight at 10,000 at VY. Prove to them that you don't get vapor lock. Now, you don't in a normal Tiger, but of course I'm pulling 22 gallons an hour up the fuel lines with much more suction, so you might. So they say, well, tell us how you're going to get the fuel to 115 degrees in the wing. So I'll put the fuel cooker. Which I did. It's available for AYA use. It's out on loan right now to another project. A fuel pump and a bunch of copper tubing that's wound around a bunch of big power resistors with big control over here to run the power up in the resistors, and as the fuel's pumping around this copper tubing, it's going back in the wing. You can bring the wing up to 115 degrees in about 2 hours, 25 gallons. I made a mistake there, though. I had it in the back of my wife's Honda Civic for a while. And I get a call at home, and she was at the shopping center about 2 blocks away. She walked back to the car, and 2 guys came up and opened their wallets and showed the gold badge and said they were with the DEA. They wanted to know what that was. And she said, my husband uses it as a cooker. He cooks gasoline in it. Both hands on the car. So you gotta watch this thing. I've written on it. This is a fuel cooker, but it's hard to tell when you look at it the first time. That worked out pretty well. We did out at Thermal, California, on a nice 100-degree day. They came out and witnessed the airplane climb to 10,000 feet without getting vapor lock. But I was still sitting there, and I was always FAA guys, why are you down? And then a light out of nowhere. My phone rings at my desk at work, and voice says, "Hi, this is Joe Brownlee. I'm with the flight test section up at Long Beach, and your project just crossed my desk." And I said, "Oh, no, you know." And he says, "I spent 9 years at Edwards as a test pilot. There's no such thing as an overpowered airplane." I said, "What?" He said, "There's no such thing as an overpowered airplane." He says, "F-4s were dogs, F-15s weren't much better." I said, "A man after my own heart, you know?" He said, "It sounds interesting. I'd like to be the test pilot on it." So I said, "Great, you know, we'll be in flight test here shortly as soon as I convince some of these ground pounders over there that the rest of all these regulations are met." They sent one guy down with a propeller protractor, and he couldn't say it either. He couldn't operate it. You know, he just found out that morning he's a turbine man. So he gets this thing out of the case and it's got all kinds of glass bubbles on it. You hold it up against your propeller and you level all these glass bubbles and you set the forward stop so that the propeller doesn't over-rev when it's at full on controlled pitch propeller. And it had a 50-page instruction book on it, which we spent all morning because, you know, he starts, they see the approach, they're all cool, you know. He says, "Here's the propeller protractor. Go ahead and measure it. I'll witness it." Okay? I still get along with it. He says, We got through all of that. Finally, got in the flight test. Got to do a few things here. You know, first thing you got to do is your airspeed calibrated? How many people know that? No, I don't know. The FAA says we got to know exactly because everything we do then is based on this exact calibration we have. So I have an appointment. Mr. Brownlee calls me up and he says, "We'll brief the mission at 0800 tomorrow morning. Be ready to fly." Wow, okay. I take the airplane up to Long Beach, 6:30 in the morning, park in their parking lot, ready to meet him at 8 o'clock when he comes in. And I'm looking for him, and all of a sudden his voice says, "Hi there, you know." Little guy about this tall, you know. Weighs 130 pounds. And he says, "Hi, I'm Joe Brownlee. I'm the test pilot." "Okay." He says, "I've got to go change, though, and I'll be right with you." So this innocent-looking guy disappears. And about 5 minutes later, he comes back. I swear he grew 2 feet, you know. He's got this blue flight suit on. It says FAA test pilot, big gold wings, you know. Heavy sunglasses, and he's pulling on pigskin gloves, you know. And he says, "Let's go." Great, you know. I get out to the ramp, and he says, "Hey, neat airplane, you know. Canopy sliding canopy back and forth. You know, I never saw him like that, you know." But I will tell you, and I've been around these airplanes and a lot of airplanes for a lot of years. Mr. Brownlee sat in the airplane, and he said, "We're going to take off from Long Beach. We'd all plan this out. We didn't know how long the flight would take right down in a couple of minutes. We're going to go out here over to Queen Mary, out in Long Beach Harbor. We're going to climb down breakwater. We know the breakwater is 3,872.6 feet long from previous surveying. So therefore, if we make 2 runs, we'll know what the average airspeed is by time on a stopwatch. You can run a stopwatch." So here's the catch-22 part with the FAA. They fly the airplane, but you're the pilot in command. And you always have to fly with them. Because they haven't broken an airplane yet in testing. A lot of pilots in commands yet, but they never. This they explain their ground rules to you. So Mr. Brownlee takes the airplane off, and he reads the book. And he took the book literally. How many people in their, in the airplane flight manual for Tigers says raise the nose at 55 to 60 knots? Mr. Brownlee raised the nose at 55 to 60 knots. Made a comment, flight manual should say that should be a little higher. Times out at 90 knots, goes over to Queen Mary, and we're in the harbor there at Long Beach at 200 feet. The airplane in the next 45 minutes did not move off at 200 feet by more than 5 feet. He ran the runs at 70 knots, 80 knots, 90 knots, 100 knots, 110, 20, 30, 140, and then they wanted to know what it would do at sea level, correct, 2992 and 59 degrees for standard day, because if the airplane would run at more than 110% of the green arc, and the green arc in a Tiger VNO is 143 knots. That's developed as 90% of the gust load envelope called VC, which is 159 knots. If it would run in level flight greater than 159 knots, they were going to limit the horsepower of the engine because the gust load proving the Grumman had done on the airplane. So the last run was at 158.5 knots, wide open, 200 feet off the breakwater here at Long Beach. And the airplane, in all these reversal turns, would start the course at the correct airspeed for the next one, never changing by more than 5 feet in altitude. And when we reduced the data from his runs, and I drove all this data down with stopwatches, The airspeed indicator was approximately 4/10 of a knot off over most of his range. And he never varied the data. Well, this guy's all right, you know. Of course, he disappeared again, turned back into a normal person, and he says, it was fun, but then he says, tomorrow we can have real fun. I'm going to do what they call the AFCG stall series. This is stalls. I always teach stalls. I have no problem. He said, it's a series of 12 stalls. In all combinations of straight ahead, 30-degree bank, left 30-degree bank, right. Power off, clean, power off, dirty, power on, clean, and full power on, dirty with the full flaps. Well, the power off ones go great. Airplane's within the standard published CG, so in all the cases recovers. Now we get into the power on stalls. And the airplane tends to get up about 60 degrees nose high. The airspeed indicator drops down to 0. It feels like it's rolling over a 3-foot road in a Jeep or something like that. Joe Speeder just going great, trying to hold that ball centered and everything. Finally, the torque wins, and the airplane rolls inverted, you know, and drops through. Did the incipient spin entry, snap back out of it, back below. He said, that's pretty good. He said, I'm taking notes on this, by the way. He says, here, okay, I'll make the comments on brakes and where the stalls occur so you can meet all the Part 23 certification. And he's talking through all this, you know, we're on our back, falling down towards the Queen Mary, and he says, not bad, put down. I think I can hold it a little longer, let's do this again. So I go through it again, you know, and it leaps around the sky, and he rolls over on his back, and he says, not bad, you know. That took all day, got back. I remember going to the telephone there at the FBO. He went back to the office and called my wife, says, I'm going to be a little late. Meet me at the airport. Bring underwear. That was a lot of fun. Learned a lot of things, how to work with them. Then we hit a monumental roadblock. Monumental. Regulations just went into effect at the time, where the FAA adopted what they call FAR 36. Most people know 91, 61, right? 135, 36. FAR 36. What is it? It's a noise regulation. But the FAA didn't write it. The EPA did. So when you ask the FAA something about their noise regulation, they say, beats us, came down from the EPA. We just signed it, you know. So it goes on rather involved. It's not really that involved if you're doing a 747 and you can devote about $50,000 to the test procedure. But if you're trying to do one airplane, you have to basically do what Boeing has to do for a Stage 3 747. It defines the microphone, the type of grass around the microphone to reflect the sound back up to the microphone, which is located 1 meter above this grass that's been defined by them. Where it is 8,200 feet from brake release. And what type of cone above this noise measuring device the airplane was passed through. So I have all these things and started talking to industrial sound type things to look at what it would take to put the equipment together. Of course, nothing with the FAA unless it's been calibrated within the last 15 minutes. You know? So finally, after 6 months, this was all through last summer, I finally said, surely there's some sanity somewhere. And they put it up through what they call the Small Plane Directorate, which is, they refer to as the Pope in the aircraft modification business in Kansas City. And the Pope said, no, we must follow the EPA regulations. So therefore, Bombay says, we can't help you any further because the Pope has spoken. So I wrote the EPA, and I said, hey guys, well, here's my plan that they keep turning down is, if I took a Tiger and I removed the Tiger from certification, can I run a noise test instead of coming up with this mathematical model with the noise footprint and everything? Can I just be somewhat quieter than the original Tiger? I mean, that would save a lot of money. And that went away, and I didn't hear for 2 weeks. I got another phone call at work. It was the EPA in Washington. And it wasn't a fellow who sat on the committee when they adopted that. He said, nobody ever brought up the fact somebody changes a airplane. These were rules that were supposed to go in effect for all airplanes for new certification and things like that. You know? And he said, I see your point. If you're removing an airplane and you make one that doesn't make any more noise than the one you're removing from circulation, then we don't see any problem with that. And not only that, we're going to tell our boys over here at the FAA in Washington that we approve of your procedure. And I said, okay. just a couple days later, I get a call from Propulsion Engineering in Long Beach. They're kind of downhearted because they hope they kill this thing, you know. I said, hey, remember that guy we told you used to call himself the Pope in Kansas City? He changed his mind. He's never done that. 20 years, he's never changed his mind. He just changed his mind. He says he likes your procedure. I think he heard that from Washington, you know. So now they jump on a bandwagon because they realize that now everybody wants to be involved in this new standard for FAR 36 noise testing. So they agreed to do it down in San Diego, and they're going to come down with 6 people from Long Beach, bring their equipment, set it up, all this, and we're going to do this on a Tuesday. Well, they're going to come down on Monday because we're going to do it early Tuesday morning. They actually come down and stay in the motel. We met at the local Bizdo. And that afternoon, we thought we'd go out to the site. Well, the site, since the runway is only 3,400 foot long, the site happened to be in a residential area. The city also had a noise monitoring microphone in that same area, because my proposal originally had been to use the city's noise microphone to do this comparison testing. And they decided, no, this time we'll spring for equipment. See, they can change the rules if they want. They won't change the rules if you want. So they bring their own equipment, and they're going to set it up there right in the same place the city has their equipment, residential area. So we all go out to the site in the afternoon. Other AYA people helped here. Leon Helms helped, Peter Gotten helped. Leon was the one who would guide the airplanes when they lift off over the sound, with the handy-talk, he'd tell them which way to keep going and get over to the sound measuring site. But we show up, and you know what happens when you pull in a residential area about 3 o'clock in the afternoon with 6 government cars and go up in one person's front lawn? First thing that happens, 30 kids on bicycles show up, okay? The little old lady comes out of the house and says, oh no, you know. So they asked the little old lady if it's okay if they use her front yard to do this test. And she said, sure, move the car nose, you know, it's all yours. So we're all set for the next morning. And in order to do this test, I had to compare it with a standard Tiger. And it had to be a standard Tiger with a Macaulay propeller on it, because nobody knows what kind of noise an altered Tiger with a sensitive prop makes. So they have to do what they call a conformity inspection on the airplane. Now, how do you find somebody who owns a Tiger who put up their airplane for this test? When you explain to them, the FAA is going to take it apart and see if there's anything on it that doesn't meet its original picture. That is a challenge. Fortunately, parked not too far away from me was a lieutenant commander in the Navy at Miramar who owned a Tiger. Navy people drank. The FAA still wants to know how much it took before he said, boy, it sounds like a good idea, you know, they might find something wrong. So they took his airplane apart, decided, yeah, it looks like a Tiger. Got all the parts it's supposed to have. And certified it as a comparison airplane. Next thing we had to do was have his airspeed calibrated, because this test says both airplanes will climb out at BY, 90 knots in the Tiger. So I said, well, why can't we just fly my airplane and use that airplane as a pace, or vice versa? And that way, since my airspeed calibrator now has got graphs that go over the entire world on air, we could just compare one to the other and apply that offset factor to his. Our engineers don't think much of it, but Brownlee thinks it's a great idea, you know. So he says, okay, you can fly the comparison airplane, I'll fly yours. I said, wait a minute, I thought you had me in it you guys never had to spy on command. He said, nobody's going to be by command of this one, I'll just fly. Okay. In fact, you got a ground pounder engineer, the guy who's still trying to figure out the propeller protractor. And they get in my airplane, and I take Dick's airplane, and another engineer, another FAA, and FAA engineers everywhere, you know. Because everybody wanted to get their name in this first time this test was done. Someone's secretly hoping it doesn't work, and the other half are kind of hoping it does. Brownlee always wanted it to. He loved the airplane. And I take off out of Montgomery, going to the coast. We had to do one of Joe's briefings on this, of course, you know, we'll launch it this time. But I heard him leave behind me, and then we switched over to a multi-com frequency, and Joe says, okay, I'm in position on your right wing. And I kind of glanced over there, and that guy's sitting about 18 inches off my wing. And all I see is that 82-inch prop going around out there. So I'm trying to fly 90 knots and not think about him out there because I'm lead, right? But the sun keeps glancing off that prop and it's right out there. And of course the other two guys, the engineers, they don't know any better. They're taking 35 millimeter pictures themselves, you know. So we're flying along, and that guy kept the airplane. When I do a 180 to go back the other way, he didn't even roll in position. He'd lift, you know, and roll and take the non-coordinated turn on the outside, hanging in that 18-inch slot position and a turnaround. Interesting pictures. I get back to Montgomery, turns out Dix is about a knot off. It's acceptable to just apply the correction factor. So then the next morning, that's the first thing in the morning. This is really official now. They're taking pictures of themselves doing this so they can tell other FAA people how they did this. First thing we got to do is go around the course and map it every 100 feet for temperature gradient, because the regulations say you can't do it if there's a temperature inversion because it will change the sound reflections. Okay, we do that. It gets a little cooler as we go up, and engineer writes all that data down. Now we get both airplanes started up, and we talk to Montgomery, and this is off a relatively unused runway 23 at Montgomery. It goes out to the southwest there, down towards Mission Bay. These guys are out in the front yard with their equipment here on the other side of the freeway from the airport. We got handy-talkies. We're ready to go. And we're sitting there running up and running up and running up. We're not getting a word, you know, what's going on out there. All these guys had to do was, one day I set up my tripod. See, they had to have a visual evidence of the airplane passing through a 10-degree cone over this noise monitor. You can't miss by too much. So I built a camera that was pointed straight up, a Polaroid camera, with a 10-foot piece of conduit with a T-arm on the top that was about 2 foot wide. By trigonometry, so that if I ran some wires down from the 2-foot arm down to the focal point of the camera, that was a 10-degree arc, or 20-degree arc total, 10 degrees either side of right above the airplane. Now the secret was, of course, you got to push the button without being able to see through the camera while the airplane's flying through this arc with the top of this thing. As it turned out, the FAA guy trained himself, and by the end of the testing, he was indeed photographing airplanes instead of birds with this thing. I just had to supply the equipment. They said they'd operate it. Okay. So we're still sitting there, you know, and running and running and running and running. Peter's out at the site, Peter Otten. Leon's out there. 7 FAA people are out there. Test pilot's in my plane. I'm in a comparison plane. I got an engineer. He's got his whole. He's going to take more data down than you could make another Tiger with the data that he's going to take on his flight. This is just a comparison airplane. So finally, I called him on the handy-talk. I said, "What's happening out there, guys?" And Leon says, "It's garbage day. There's a garbage truck going around out here that's making noise. And a manager of propulsion and engineering is out negotiating with a garbage truck driver, and he doesn't speak English." The tower says, "What are you guys doing, you know? We're getting ready. Pretty soon now." So finally it happens. And Joe takes off in my airplane. The airplane, of course, leaves fairly well. And there's a set of power lines down by the freeway. And one of the things we briefed, in fact, we took a 4-hour meeting the day before over in the Fisno, is a Tiger gets airborne at 60 knots, 65 knots maybe. But the VY is 90 knots. So if we're going to climb at VY, do we break ground, let the airplane accelerate to 90 knots, and then climb at 50, before exceeding 50 feet? They thought about it, and they realized this will extend the airplane out a little bit, but yep, that's what they wanted to do, because the rule says you will climb at VY. Published VY on Tigers, 90 knots. So this produced the effect of when I go to take off in the comparison Tiger. By the way, both airplanes had to be at 2,400 pounds exactly, with boxes of computer paper, which I each individually weighed and packed in the back seat, and things like this that they inspected. So the old standard Tiger gets airborne. Now Frank's going to write all this data down, but he looks forward and he sees them high power lines out there. Frank, he don't say nothing, you know. He just watching them high power lines. Of course, I'm waiting for it to accelerate to 90, and at the plane we're at, we're going to go under the wires, you know. It finally gets to 90, you know, we'll lean back on it, and it goes over the wires. Frank starts writing, you know, it's okay now. We repeated the entire test series 6 times. Each time, Frank wouldn't do anything until them wires went by. Then he just filled in all the data blocks on everything that happened on that takeoff. You know, he memorized it, but he wasn't going to take his eyes off those wires. We finally got it down on the ground, and they realized that the test, indeed, as I have been pointing out, was slanted in favor of my aircraft. The average height of a gross white tiger at the 8,200 foot point worked out to be about 390 feet above the ground at that point. On my airplane, it worked out to be 1,250 feet. So I was trained to be quieter than a stock tiger at their measurement point. And it set a precedent as a method of doing something to an airplane without going back through a laboratory-controlled environment to try to prove absolute numbers of noise. If you can compare it to what you've removed from the inventory, put it in the words of the EPA, I guess you can. I don't know. I was going to ask him, if you shoot a 1960 Valiant, can you replace it with something else? But they understood what it was, and when that regulation was made, it was done strictly thinking in the Boeings and the McDonnell Douglases, and not an individual aircraft modifier. Ken Blackman's been successful in having Seattle adopt that procedure and accept it up at his airport, or over at the city monitoring site at Everett there, Payton Field in Everett. So some good came of it, right? It has broken a path to allow other people to do projects. Other people have other motivations. Peter Otten right now is putting a 260 horsepower, 200 IO 360, very similar to Joe Brewer's, in a Cheetah. And that all came about because of a three-plane formation flight. Talk about motivation, right? We're going to depart Montgomery, which is adjacent to Miramar Naval Air Station. Of course, we got our Navy Lieutenant Commander in a Tiger. There's the lead airplane. And we're going to formation fly across Miramar's airspace because he talks to the tower, right? And we're going to impress him. So I brought up the rear, and Peter was in the middle. We take off, and Dick thinks everybody's in the Tiger, you know. So Peter's Cheetah starts falling back a little bit, and I'm kind of even with him. Now I'm deciding, so do I stay with the lead or do I stay with Peter? You know, we're starting to spread out, you know. So approach control is also over at Miramar. Of course, everybody knows in a formation flight they usually have the leader squawk something and the other two airplanes turn their transponders off. We're flying along, and approach says, "You guys in a formation?" Yeah. So your wingman's trailing back about a mile. So pulls it a little bit back on a Tiger, right? Back to him, you know. Approach controller finally says, "Hey, listen, we're going to have to give a separate squawk code to that back guy because he's legal our separation from you now, you know." As Peter says, "I can't find him, guys." So that started his 200 horsepower project. They had a lot of fun with them. Like I said, a lot of people have helped with the project, ideas. It's worked out. The airplane is fun to fly. I'm not going to bore you with what it does, but what I have elected to do, though, if somebody's willing, is I'll take an independent observation. You can be Joe Brownlee for a day here, and fly the airplane. Dave says, let's have everybody throw their name in a hat, big hat or little hat, whatever it takes. And tomorrow, you can take the airplane out and exercise a little bit and tell us what you think of it. It's a fun airplane to fly. It certainly solves your density altitude problems. And it doesn't solve your fuel bill problems, though. But you don't get anything for nothing, so the airplane does indeed fly like a Tiger, except it's capable of extending its envelope out. It's been interesting. We were talking about pilots earlier. What's a macho pilot? I found the macho pilot is the one that's going to go out there, take his airworthiness certificate, and say, "Let me at him. I'm going to convert this thing."